Welcome to Hidden Ties, where every story hides a deeper truth. I was halfway to London, soaring above the clouds, when the call came through. "You're fired!" The timing couldn't have been worse, and as the turbulence rattled the plane, I realized the $1.5 billion deal I had worked my whole life for? Gone. All three of my clients? Vanished. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I was 53, fresh from another week of tight deadlines and even tighter suits. I'd spent the last 30 years working in finance, a career that had given me enough perks to build a comfortable life and enough stress to never feel fully at ease. But comfort, it turned out, was fleeting. I lived in a modest apartment in Midtown, a few blocks from my office. Some nights I'd walk home from work, past restaurants and bars, just to decompress. You get used to the rhythm of city life, to the subtle noise that fills every corner. But that day, everything felt a little different. The air was thicker, or maybe it was just my nerves. I grabbed my coffee from the usual spot, the cafe on the corner of 47th Street. The barista gave me a nod, and I returned it with a half smile. It wasn't like I was unhappy. On the outside, I had it all together. But inside, I felt something was off. That morning, I'd checked my emails a few times already, scanning for updates on a deal I'd been working on for months, a $1.5 billion merger, huge, life-changing. The deal was my ticket to a big promotion. My clients, three of the wealthiest and most influential people in Europe, were depending on me to make this work. Everything had to go perfectly. There was no room for error. I couldn't afford to lose my focus. "Linda, you good?" I heard behind me. It was Derek, one of the junior analysts from the office. He wasn't the type to check in unless something was wrong. "Yeah, just tired. You know how it is," I said, forcing a smile as I sipped the coffee. Derek gave me a long look but didn't press. "You should take it easy," he added, and I could tell he was worried. I waved him off. "I'm fine. It's just one of those weeks." It wasn't just one of those weeks, though. I felt a tightness in my chest that hadn't gone away for days. The pressure of the deal was weighing on me, but it wasn't just that. It was everything: the meetings, the long hours, the calls from clients that always came at the worst times. But what I didn't know that morning was that my entire life, everything I'd worked for, was about to implode. And it wouldn't be because of a client or a mistake at the office. No, the blow would come from an entirely unexpected direction. I boarded the plane to London in the late afternoon, my mind still wrapped around the last-minute preparations. I had a presentation to give in the morning, and I knew it had to be flawless. A smooth flight, some time to go over my notes, and I'd be good to go. I hadn't even had a chance to check my email before takeoff, didn't think to. And for the first time in years, I felt a small sense of relief. I wasn't thinking about the pressure, or the clients, or the deal. It was just me, the quiet hum of the plane, and a brief escape from the grind. But about an hour into the flight, everything changed. I felt the familiar buzz of my phone in my pocket. I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw the name: Frank, my boss. He was the one overseeing the deal, the one who had personally asked me to take it on. His calls were never good news, but I figured it couldn't hurt to answer. I flipped the phone open, only to hear his voice crackling through. "Linda, we need to talk." I sat up straighter in my seat. "What's going on?" "Listen, it's over," he said, cutting straight to the point. I blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The deal, the clients. They've pulled out. We're not going forward with it." "Pulled out?" My voice faltered. "What do you mean? I've done everything." "You didn't do enough," Frank interrupted, his tone colder than usual. "You've been too slow. I've already sent the paperwork. You're out, Linda, effective immediately." I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but what could I say? The words didn't make sense, yet they were real. This wasn't just about a lost deal. This was my career, my reputation, my future, all gone in a matter of seconds. "You can't be serious," I whispered. I'm afraid I am, Frank said, his voice flat. It's done. And then, without another word, he hung up. I sat there, frozen. I glanced out the window, watching the dark clouds swirl below us. How could this be happening? I had worked so hard, I had sacrificed so much, and now, in the blink of an eye, it was all gone. I stared at the phone screen, trying to make sense of the words that were no longer there. How was this even possible? I had spent the last few years building up my reputation, inching my way to the top, and now, in one single moment, I was... what? Fired? Just like that? The plane's hum felt deafening now, the air around me thick with 1,000 questions I couldn't answer. My hands shook as I placed the phone back into my bag, like some final acknowledgement that everything I had worked for had just evaporated into thin air. I glanced around the cabin, my eyes landing on a few tired-looking business people and a couple of families. Nobody seemed to notice. It was strange, the way life goes on, unaware of the storm brewing inside someone else. Are you okay? The voice came from the flight attendant standing by my seat. Her name tag read Kara. I nodded without thinking. Yeah, just, some bad news. She gave me a sympathetic smile but didn't press further. Can I get you anything? A drink or a snack? I shook my head. No, just need a moment. As she walked away, I tried to regain some sense of control. The flight was only halfway to London, and the last thing I wanted was to fall apart in front of strangers. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through it, but all I could hear was the buzzing of my own thoughts. They've pulled out. Those words kept echoing in my mind. Why had they pulled out? It didn't make sense. I had been in constant contact with my clients for months. I had bent over backward to make sure everything was in place. I wasn't perfect, but I was good at what I did. I had done the work. A shiver ran down my spine as the weight of it all sank in. The clients, the deal, the future I had spent years building, gone, just like that. I reached for my phone again, desperate to see if maybe, just maybe, there was an email or a message that would explain it all. Maybe Frank had made a mistake. But when I unlocked the screen, there it was. A series of missed calls from my 3 clients. That was it. The whole thing had unraveled. I had lost all of them at once. My stomach twisted, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. I didn't want to look at the phone anymore, but I had no choice. I tapped through the missed calls, hoping to find an explanation, but each call had gone straight to voicemail. What could they possibly be telling me now? That it was over? That they had backed out? My throat felt dry, and I cursed under my breath. It wasn't until I checked my email that I saw it. A message from one of my clients, Henrik, the one who had been the most invested in the deal. It was short, simple, to the point. Linda, I'm sorry to inform you that we've decided to move in a different direction. The deal is off. No hard feelings. Best of luck. That was it. No explanation, just cold finality. My mind reeled. What direction? What the hell happened? I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the seat, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. I had tried. I had given everything for this moment, and now, in the space of a few hours, everything had fallen apart. The flight attendant came by again, this time with a small tray of drinks for the passengers. She stopped at my seat, a forced cheerfulness in her voice. Are you sure you're okay? You look pale. I tried to smile, but it came out weak. Just tired. I think I'll nap. She gave me a concerned look, but nodded and moved on. I closed my eyes and leaned back, trying to make sense of it all. How could Henrik and the others, people I had worked with for months, just drop me like this? It felt like a betrayal. But even as the words bounced around in my head, I knew I couldn't just sit there and wallow in self-pity. No, I wasn't going down without a fight. But first, I needed answers. And answers weren't going to come from emails or voicemails. They certainly weren't going to come from Frank, who had already written me off. I had to talk to my clients. I stood up abruptly, surprising myself. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't let this go without trying. I needed to fight for this, for everything I had worked for. I pulled my phone out once more, scrolling through the contacts. Henrik's number was at the top of the list. I took a deep breath. Then I dialed. The phone rang and rang. I stared at the screen, willing Henrik to pick up. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe he didn't want to be bothered by my panicked call. But I had to try. I didn't know what I expected. An apology, a reason, a solution. But I couldn't stand the silence any longer. Every second that ticked by was another moment of doubt creeping in. Finally, just as I was about to hang up, the call connected. "Linda, this is Henrik." His voice was cold, distant, the kind of tone that made it clear he had already moved on. I could feel my frustration rising, but I kept my voice steady, even though I was anything but calm. "Henrik, I need to understand what happened. You can't just pull out like this, without any warning, without any explanation." There was a long pause on the other end. "I don't owe you an explanation," he said flatly. "The decision has been made. We've chosen a new path. That's all there is to it." His words hit me like a slap in the face. "I don't owe you an explanation?" I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to yell. "Henrik, we've been working together for months. I've put everything into this. I'm not asking for your charity. I just want to know why." He sighed, the sound of exasperation clear. "Listen, Linda, the deal didn't go as planned. We found a better option. It's that simple. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got other things to take care of." And then, without waiting for me to respond, the line went dead. I sat there dumbfounded. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was empty. How could someone I had trusted, someone I had worked so hard for, turn their back on me so easily? The sting of betrayal made my head spin. This wasn't just a lost deal. This was my livelihood, my career. Everything I had worked for had just been swept away in an instant. And worse, there was nothing I could do about it. I ended the call and stared at my phone, my mind racing. I had tried to get answers, but I hadn't gotten anything. Henrik had made it clear. I was out. The deal was gone. And no matter how much I tried to fight it, there was nothing I could do to change that. I closed my eyes and leaned back again, my thoughts spinning in every direction. But then, something caught my attention. An email popped up on my screen. It wasn't from Henrik or one of the other clients. It was from Frank. I almost didn't open it. What could he possibly have to say to me after what he had just done? But something in me couldn't resist. I tapped it open, and my eyes scanned the message. "Linda, I'm afraid this is bigger than you realize. The entire deal has fallen apart. I can't go into details right now, but I suggest you take a step back. Your clients are already gone, and there's nothing left to salvage." I stared at the email, trying to process what I was reading. The deal was bigger than I realized? What did that mean? I reread the lines, my head spinning. Frank wasn't just telling me that the deal was off. He was telling me there was something more behind it, something hidden. I sat there for a while, my mind turning over every possible angle. What had really happened? Why had Henrik and the others pulled out? Why had Frank fired me so quickly without even trying to help me salvage it? And then, in the middle of my confusion, it hit me. I wasn't just fired. I was being set up. There was something going on behind the scenes, something I wasn't supposed to know. Maybe Frank wasn't just cutting me out because I failed. Maybe he had his own reasons for wanting this deal to fall apart. Maybe he wasn't being honest with me at all. I didn't know for sure, but something told me that the truth wasn't as simple as it seemed. And if I wanted to get to the bottom of it, I was going to have to dig deeper. I put the phone down and stood up, my mind made up. I wasn't going to sit around and let this happen to me. Not without a fight. I walked down the narrow aisle of the plane, my thoughts racing faster than my steps. There had to be someone who knew what had happened. Someone who could give me a hint, a piece of information. I needed to talk to people who were involved in the deal. People who could help me put the pieces together. But just as I reached the back of the plane, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Frank. "Meet me at the office when you land. There's something I need to explain." I froze for a moment. This was it. The chance to get answers, to confront Frank, to find out if there was something bigger going on. But something inside me told me that this meeting wasn't going to be as simple as I hoped. Frank hadn't given me any reason to trust him, and everything that had happened so far pointed to the fact that I wasn't just a casualty in a failed deal. I was part of a much larger game, and I was determined to find out how deep the rabbit hole went. The flight touched down in London a few hours later, but I felt as though I had been in the air for days. My head was still buzzing from the call, the betrayal, and the cryptic message from Frank. I hadn't felt this lost in years, not since the early days of my career when every deal felt like a gamble. But now I was being played. I tried to focus as I made my way to baggage claim, my thoughts darting between possible reasons for what was happening. Frank's message had been unsettling to say the least. Was he going to try and spin this as my fault? Was this some tactic to get me out of the way? I needed clarity, and I needed it now. The Uber ride from the airport to my office felt endless. London streets, usually familiar and calming, felt foreign to me in that moment. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. My mind raced. The last time I saw Frank, everything was cordial. Professional, yes, but he was still my boss, my superior, my ally in this deal. But now, he was part of the problem, and I wasn't sure if I was walking into a confrontation or another betrayal. When I finally arrived at the office, I barely had time to check in at reception before my phone buzzed again. It was Frank, of course. "Linda, conference room 2, now." I didn't bother with pleasantries. I headed straight for the conference room, determined to confront him head on. As I approached the door, I paused. There were no sounds coming from inside, no signs of Frank's presence. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. Frank sat at the head of the long, glossy table, his usual air of composure in place. His expensive suit and sharp, calculating eyes made him look as though he belonged in the boardroom, in charge of everything. But today, I wasn't interested in the facade. "Linda, you made it," Frank said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "Cut the crap, Frank," I snapped, stepping forward. "What the hell is going on? Why was I fired without warning? What happened to the deal? And why didn't you tell me the truth?" Frank's eyes darkened, and he steepled his fingers in front of him. "I told you what you needed to know. The deal's off. The clients are gone." He paused, then added in a clipped tone, "You failed." "Failed?" My voice wavered despite my best efforts. "You're going to sit there and tell me that, after everything I did for this company, after everything I did for you? You don't get to just throw me under the bus like this. I want answers." He looked at me for a moment, as though weighing his words. "I don't have time to sugarcoat it for you, Linda. The truth is, this deal was always going to fall apart. You just didn't see it coming." I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. "What do you mean it was always going to fall apart? Frank, you brought me in. You told me I was the best person for the job. What really happened?" Frank finally leaned forward, his voice lowering. "The deal was too risky from the beginning, but the real problem wasn't the merger itself. It was the people involved, the ones you thought you were working with. Henrik and his partners? They weren't playing by the same rules." I took a step back, absorbing his words, but they didn't make sense. "Are you telling me the clients wanted to back out?" Frank's eyes locked with mine. "No, they never intended to stay in. They were using you as a front to divert attention from a much bigger deal they were secretly planning. You were just a pawn in a game you didn't even realize you were playing." The room seemed to tilt as the shock hit me. The betrayal, the lies. Henrik had never intended to follow through. He had strung me along, played me, all while building something else on the side. And Frank? He had known. He had let it happen. I felt my knees weaken. I couldn't breathe. "You knew," I whispered, the weight of the realization settling on me like a ton of bricks. You knew, and you let me fall into this." Frank didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave a tight smile. "You're a smart woman, Linda. You should have seen it coming." I stood there trying to steady myself. Anger was bubbling up inside me. Anger at Frank, at Henrik, at myself for not seeing it sooner. But more than that, there was a sense of cold clarity. This was more than a betrayal. This was a calculated move, and I had been blindsided. I gritted my teeth. "So that's it then? I was just collateral damage in your little game?" Frank leaned back in his chair, still too calm. "You weren't just collateral, you were useful, but now the deal's dead, and you're not needed anymore." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed, despite the wave of rage and humiliation threatening to consume me. I couldn't let him see me break. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You think this is over?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You think you can just wipe your hands of me and walk away?" Frank's eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe? No, I wasn't going to make the mistake of underestimating him again. "No, Linda," he said slowly, almost too calmly. "It's not over. But I'll say this. It's not going to be easy for you. You've made a lot of enemies, and the ones you've trusted most? They're not who you think they are." I felt my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. Frank wasn't done. He had just fired the first shot, and I wasn't going to sit back and let him destroy me. I turned toward the door, my mind spinning with everything Frank had just revealed. He thought this was the end of the line for me, but he was wrong. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. The game had changed, and now I was going to play it on my terms. The cold air hit me like a slap when I stepped out of the office building. My breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, the rage still bubbling inside me. Everything Frank had said, everything he had insinuated, felt like a betrayal too far. I stood on the curb for a moment, looking out at the busy London street, trying to gather my thoughts. How had it come to this? A few hours ago, I'd been sitting on a plane, thinking I could still save it. I had trusted Frank. I had trusted Henrik. And now, it seemed like they had been playing me from the start. I had to make sense of this mess. I wasn't about to let Frank walk away unscathed, and I wasn't going to let Henrik get away with using me as a pawn. But first, I needed to cool down. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I pulled out my phone, quickly scrolling through the contacts. There was one name that stood out: Elliot. Elliot had worked with me on several high-stakes deals in the past. We weren't exactly friends, but we had mutual respect. If anyone knew how to handle a situation like this, it was him. I sent a quick message. "Elliot, we need to talk. It's urgent. Can you meet me?" Within minutes, he responded, "Meet me at the Vault in an hour. We'll talk." The Vault was a quiet bar in the heart of the city, one of those places where no one asked questions. I needed a neutral space where I could think and strategize. This wasn't just about fixing a broken deal anymore. This was about getting my life back on track. I arrived at the Vault with a few minutes to spare, my heart still racing. Elliot was already there, leaning against the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked up as I walked in, a brief flash of recognition crossing his face before he gestured for me to join him. "Linda," he said, his tone low but warm. "It's been a while." I took a seat next to him, not bothering with pleasantries. "Cut the small talk. Frank did something today that I can't just let slide, and I need your help." Elliot raised an eyebrow, setting his drink down. I figured something was going on. What happened? I explained everything: the deal, the clients pulling out, Frank's betrayal, Henrik's involvement. As I spoke, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. I was finally talking to someone who wasn't in on the game, someone who could give me an outside perspective. When I finished, Elliot didn't speak right away. He leaned back in his chair, taking a long sip of his drink. "Sounds like you've been played," he said finally, his voice matter of fact. "But here's the thing. Frank's not the only one you need to be worried about." What do you mean? I asked, the unease creeping back into my chest. Elliot's gaze darkened. Henrik, the guy you've been working with? He's been working both sides for months now. He's got connections, people who aren't so friendly, people who don't play by the rules. Frank probably knew about this, and that's why he cut you loose. He was protecting his own neck. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You're telling me Henrik was playing me, and Frank? Elliot nodded. Exactly. And I bet you've got a whole bunch of investors and corporate vultures circling, waiting for the fallout. I sat back, feeling the ground shift beneath me. Everything I had trusted, everything I thought I knew, was coming apart. And the worst part? Frank and Henrik had been playing a game I wasn't even aware of. I clenched my fists. So, what do I do now? Elliot looked at me, his expression serious. You get ahead of it. You expose them. You start digging into Henrik's deals, his connections. There's more to this story than you realize, Linda. You need to find out exactly what he's been up to, and then you make sure that Frank and Henrik don't get away with it. I nodded slowly. I'll get the answers. I'll make them pay. But something inside me, something deeper, told me this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger, something that I had never seen coming. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Frank and Henrik weren't just playing me. They were playing a much larger game, one that I had no idea I was a part of. But I would find out. I would dig deep, expose everything, and take them both down. I spent the next few days on high alert, chasing leads, making calls, piecing together the shattered fragments of my former life. Elliot was right. Henrik had been working both sides, and Frank had been the first to pull out because he knew the real scope of the damage. Henrik was dangerous, and Frank had been trying to cover his own tracks. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I dug deeper, reaching out to former colleagues and investors who might have information. Slowly but surely, I began to piece together the truth. Henrik was tied to a series of shady investments, some of them involving money laundering and corrupt business practices. Frank had been involved in some of it, though not as deeply as Henrik. But the fact that Frank had fired me so quickly, it spoke volumes. In the days that followed, the walls closed in. I began to see the bigger picture. Frank and Henrik were players in a much larger corporate game, one where loyalty didn't exist, and the stakes were beyond what I had originally understood. Then, just when I thought I had a grasp on it all, I got the call I wasn't expecting. It was Henrik. He wanted to meet. I knew this was the moment I could either walk away and let it all go, or I could take everything I had learned and use it to destroy both of them. I wasn't walking away. I met Henrik in a small cafe, one where the windows were fogged up, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee. He was already sitting at a corner table, his back to the window. When I walked in, he didn't acknowledge me right away. He just took a slow sip of his coffee, watching me out of the corner of his eye. "Linda," he said, his voice low, "I thought we'd left things on good terms." I didn't sit down. "You and I both know that's not true." He looked at me with a small smile. "You've been digging, haven't you?" I didn't answer, but the look on my face must have said enough. Henrik leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the rim of his cup. "You're smart, Linda. You were always smart. But sometimes knowing too much can be dangerous." I took a step closer, locking eyes with him. "This ends now, you and Frank. You think you can just ruin people's lives and walk away. But I'm not letting that happen. You think I'm going to let you get away with this?" Henrik didn't flinch. "What exactly do you plan to do, Linda? Expose me? You think anyone would believe you over me?" I took a deep breath, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. This wasn't just about the deal anymore. This was about taking control of my life again. "I don't need anyone to believe me, Henrik, because I've got the truth on my side, and that's all I need."